This hand is perfectly reasonable, even on the draw. It's definitely a keep. Couple of spot removal spells. And Blackleaf Cliffs into Insolent Neonate means we're likely up against Dredge here. Although we'll see. We'll see, although now I kind of wish we had a discard spell in hand so we could actually know what we're up against. And sometimes you call for a card and you get exactly what you wish for. So there's a Thoughtseize. I am going to cycle the Street Wraith. And play this Thoughtseize here. So we will be operating with perfect information. And by the way, this forest is pretty awkward right now, just because we have all black and red spells, plus a forest in hand. Yeah, not where you want to be. So yep, it is Dredge. And we're going to get rid of a Cathartic Reunion here. But we have to be wary of the fact that our opponent does have that Life from the Loam to start chaining some lands together. And yep, that Life from the Loam is going to get discarded immediately, get brought back. Our opponent can then use it. So our opponent's going to have access to a ton of lands because of that Life from the Loam. And because we're still at 13, the Death Shadow is not able to get played yet. Although there's a Stomping Grounds, so with that Stomping Grounds, we can get this Death Shadow into play. So just going to go for that. And our opponent's going to continue with their line of just dredging Life from the Loam. So that's where we're at right now. So Life from the Loam, get back Wooded Foothills. I think we actually want to use this Tarfire. And I'm thinking about using it on myself. As crazy as that sounds, just to make this Death Shadow bigger. Sure, why not? Let's go for it. Try to win this game quickly. The cards in hand are not particularly impressive right now, to say the least. But on the bright side, our opponent hasn't done that much. Now, if our opponent hits a Conflagrate, they can just basically win with that card. So hopefully our opponent does not dredge into a Conflagrate. So I'm going to Inquisition away that Narcomoeba that we know about. Although our opponent also has a Life from the Loam, an extra Life from the Loam. So there's an argument to... I think we definitely want to get rid of the Narcomoeba. And we don't really care that much about our opponent having that Life from the Loam. We could play this Forest, but it's not really particularly relevant on this board, but sure. I'm going to put it into play. So expect to see another Dredge. And our opponent, once again, just not a great Dredge there. So the Life from the Loam gets back a couple of lands, but this Death Shadow might just go the distance in this game. It's kind of a game where both we and our opponent have not executed our own game plan properly, and so it's just a matter of the cards that are left, and it happens to be a 4/4 Death Shadow versus Life from the Loam trying to find a Bloodghast or a Conflagrate or what have you. But it looks like we found what we needed to first. So this Verdant Catacombs was actually the perfect draw step. We can use the Verdant Catacombs, find an Overgrown Tomb, and shock, go down to 6. But now we've got a 7/7 Death Shadow. And guess what? Temur Battle Ridge plus Death Shadow, that's 14. Then we can use Collective Brutality to deal the last 2. So having perfect information about what's in our opponent's hand, I believe that we have lethal this turn. So sometimes you go from, you can just get your opponent from 16 to 0, and this is one of those times. So, yep, had our opponent found a Conflagrate, they could have answered the Death Shadow. Would have been really bad for us, but it worked out that dredging 3 with the Life of Malome, it turns out, it's a lot worse than dredging 6 with Golgari Grave Troll, which is what it used to be. And we saw that our opponent just didn't get their graveyard full fast enough. And we were able to capitalize on that. So in terms of sideboarding, we have a very good card in the matchup. 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage. So that's by far the best card in our sideboard. Not even close in this particular matchup. We've got a bunch of cards in our deck that we don't really want, and that's primarily the removal. Like cards like Fatal Push, we had one in hand last game. Never cast it. So I like boarding out Fatal Pushes. Liliana of the Veils and Colligan's Commands are also not that great. So yeah, Liliana of the Veil, I'm going to take that one out. Colligan's Command. Maybe we'll see what else we want to board in here though. So Collective Brutality is also not that great. I think we probably want this Ranger of Eos. Lingering Souls, it's not ideal in this matchup. It may be, however, that we still board it in. That sounds about right. Although, yeah, I think we just keep in a couple Brutalities and maybe board in 1 Lingering Souls, even though the card's not great in the matchup. Still like Tarfires. Got a lot of discard still. Alright, let's go 1 more Lingering Souls. Not much choosing between which is the worst option. We're going to have some cards in our deck that just aren't very good in the matchup. But in exchange, we have some cards that are great in this matchup, so it's still fine. And I'm going to keep this hand. Bobble and Street Wraith mean we're going to get to maneuver a little bit before getting this Death Shadow into play. And our opponent has a Thoughtseize, so I'm just going to let this resolve. We could actually cycle Street Wraith in response. I don't think that's right. So I'd rather just let our opponent take a card. Looks like it's going to be a Goyf. So interesting that our opponent cares more about Goyf than Death Shadow. I'm not sure that that decision is correct, actually. But either way, don't mind that choice, although that land was a pretty miserable draw. So I'm going to Mishra's Bauble, target us with the ability so we can see if we wanted to draw this next card or not. And it looks like it's actually a Mishra's Bauble sitting on top of the library there. And we don't really want that, so I'm just going to go ahead, crack the Bloodstained Mire, go down to 17, now cycle Street Wraith, see what we find, and it's a Temur Battle Rage, so Not a card we can cast right now, but something we could definitely use to end the game, depending on what our draw steps are. And there's a Thoughtseize. So I'm actually quite happy to have the Death Shadow instead of the Goyf. I think our opponent may have misstepped there. And we can cast a Thoughtseize now. See what our opponent's working with. So double Conflagrate in hand. There's a Stinkweed Imp, which... So none of these cards we actually really want our opponent to discard. If we make our opponent discard the Stinkweed Imp, they will just dredge it back. So this Thoughtseize is not actually good beneficial. I'm just gonna discard the Conflagrate, one of the Conflagrates. And so now we can go down to 10. So the issue now is I think we just want to pass the turn. We don't want our Death Shadow to get Conflagrated. So that was a little bit unfortunate. Definitely wishing we hadn't cast that Thoughtseize, but at least now we know what's going on. So the reason why I'm not casting the Death Shadow is because we could play it as a 3/3, but then our opponent can Conflagrate it, and by discarding 3 cards at that point. And it looks like our opponent actually found a Dredge outlet right off the top. So that was a good draw for our opponent. And now with a Haunted Dead in hand, this is a pretty scary situation. So I'm going to take a draw step before cracking this fetch. It's a Colligan's Command. So I like committing the Death Shadow. We pretty much have to commit the Death Shadow, right? So we're gonna play it as a 1/1. And then just play another fetch and pass the turn. So this is a little bit of a tricky situation because I actually think we're advantaged in the spot, even though it may look like we only have a 1/1 and we're facing all of this dredge stuff happening from our opponent's side, but we can make this Death Shadow huge potentially. And there's a Stinkweed Imp. So our opponent's kind of gumming up the ground, but we actually wouldn't mind. We don't mind these attacks. So that's going to put us down to 10. So let's see. I believe we have lethal here. We can Tarfire away the Stinkweed Imp. And I believe we have lethal. So each of these fetch lands are the equivalent of 3 damage, or at least the first 2 are the equivalent of 3 damage. The Bloodstained Mire is only going to be 1 because of the amount of lands we have left in the deck. So we can crack Foothills down to 4, Bloodstained Mire down to 3, Death Shadow becomes a 10/10. We can then Temur Battle Rage it. So yeah, I think this is the perfect situation to be in. And it looks like our opponent may see what's going on. And we're super happy that those flyers came in just to make it even easier for us to win this turn. So we can go ahead, find that. Actually, sorry, we do have two more Shocklands we can find. So I'm gonna get the Stomping Ground here. Might as well Tarfire away the Stinkweed Imp for value. So we can basically, by sacrificing this Bloodstained Mire, we're just going for overkill here. We're going to 1 because, hey, I want to deal our opponent 21, so let's do it. So we throw the Temur Battle Rage at 1 life, Temur Battle Rage the Death Shadow, and that's going to be